Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hey, Tiffany. We
Hi.
like seeing people on video. If you can be on there, it's always good. I generally we don't do the webinar style format, so people can come on and we can see your faces and people can know what your reactions are to things. Hopefully, Harry will come back. It'd be good to see his face. There we
And
go.
his beautiful background.
That is not making me happy. No, that I is giving me jealousy twinges. So
But if you want, I can point it that way. You can see the ocean.
it's getting colder here in New York. So
Make it a little bit better, Harry. Just a little bit.
all right. Shall we kick things? Do, 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 do. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's our second day. If you missed stuff yesterday, we should be putting up those YouTube videos hopefully in the coming days. First, thanks to all of our sponsors for the event. Offbeat Travel, which you will learn more about in this session. Pick LJ, explore Brookhaven Miles Partnership, visit Lauderdale, and visit Greater Palm Springs. As you could tell, we like seeing cameras on. We don't like having microphones on if you're not speaking now. So let's try to make sure that we have any outside noises away from microphones. At any point, feel free to add comments. Tell us who you are in the chat, what organizations you're from. You can also change your name in the participants. So you add your organization. If you go to participants, click the three dots and rename. You can put your organization there as well. And we'll have another session after this. And we hope to see you in New York for our awards dinner on December 10th. And for those who are interested in our highest level DEI certification, please take part in CDDP coming next month. All right. Justice, decolonization, and empowerment. I would say these topics don't get discussed that much in the travel space, which I think in a lot of yeah, it's true. There are certainly spaces where it is discussed, such as the event The Crest with Rise of Support ran in Atlanta. I want to thank Harry and Offbeat for sponsoring this panel, and I'd love for you to meet our panelists. Let's start with Harry, sponsors prerogative.
Hi everyone, I'm Harry. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Offbeat Travel. We're a destination management company based in the Dominican Republic and Costa Rica and Puerto Rico. We specialize in student travel, so we do a lot of high school groups, college groups, and we have a big focus on decolonization. We put it in our mission. So our mission is to decolonize travel and create equity in the travel industry by ensuring the people in the places we visit have ownership of the design, management, and implementation and economic benefits of travel to their community. So we put out the focus of our company because we want everything to leave as much of a positive impact on locals as possible. So I grew up in New York, from the Bronx. I'm Dominican American. I've kind of gone back and forth my whole life, but I definitely grew up in New York. Yeah, and I'm here in beautiful Dominican Republic with a sunny sky right now. So sorry, all of those northeast are cold right now. I'll pass it off to Vince.
Oh, we're gonna popcorn.
I don't know. I just passed it off to Vince just because.
Great. Thank you, Harry. Can everybody hear me? Fine? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, so I am the founder and executive director of Rise Travel Institute. It is a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to create a more just and equitable world through travel education. And so what we do is to offer certification programs and free resources for travelers and also tourism professionals alike to learn more about how we can all, together find ways to practice and operate and, think about travel in a more thoughtful way, and so that we can minimize the harm and benefit and maximize the benefits for the local communities. And so I am also an adjunct faculty at Antioch University teaching human rights in an master's education program. And I am originally from Hong Kong. And so you can see the beautiful virtual background here. That's the Victoria Harbor. And I'm currently living in New Jersey. And yeah, this is where I have been living for the past 10 years before moving to the States.
Thank you,
So
Nancy.
thank you for having me.
We could see the harbor breeze moving your hair. Jana, also known as Jazz.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here with you all. My name is Jana Zinzi. I also go by Jazz, and I am the co-founder, CEO, boss lady in charge of Wander Women Travels. And it is a travel guide and agency that centers women and gender expansive folks of color who are looking for cultural and sustainable travel adventures. And I'm also a travel journalist, and my focus with my travel journalism really is the diaspora for one, African diaspora, but also really a focus again on community-based tourism. How are we uplifting those conversations about what sustainability looks like? And really wanting to highlight businesses by folks in communities of color, locally owned businesses, indigenous communities, et cetera. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm from New York originally. That's why I got hyped when Harry was mentioning the Bronx. But I live in New Orleans right now, so it is still warm, even though I'm jealous that you're by the beach. It's beautiful, perfect weather in New Orleans this time of year.
All right. Big question. We'll stay with Jazz. What's right? Well, two questions. What's right with travel? What's wrong with travel?
I was like, oh, what's wrong with travel? So much easier. But no, I'm going to start with what's right with travel. I mean, spaces like this, and that there is a growing awareness of thinking about travel as a means to connect with community, as a way to be in a community building space, right? As using travel dollars, using whether you're on social media or a storyteller in other ways to uplift the local communities, especially in places where people may be, where there's gentrification or, different things, migration patterns happening. So I feel like there's just a different level of awareness that folks, even general travelers, are having around like, what is my impact? What is my footprint? And that's inspiring to me because I feel like I'm sure all of us here on this panel have felt like we've been kind of like talking this talk for a while, and folks are like, whatever, I'm just gonna, hop in for a day, take my Instagram pictures and roll out. So I think that that's right. And I also think that there's cool things happening in terms of like affinity groups, uplifting Black travel spaces, queer travelers. So that's cool. What's wrong with travel, I think, is like kind of oh, there's a lot. But I would really say the lack of substantive, maybe it's not conversation, but I also think of like the self, having like a proper check-in with yourself of like, what is the impact of me as a traveler? I tend to look at things a lot of time from a media perspective. I work in media, and there's still ways in which media, whether it's traditional media or social media, is creating over tourism and really, it's the money making, like, well, I can make more money. I can get this free trip if I go and promote this place that is like already saturated with tourism, and not really kind of understanding the consequences of that. And I also think in terms of media, there tends to be still a lack of interest and lack of outlets to have more substantive conversations around sustainability, cultural preservation, safety issues. It's, the media model is like 10 reasons to visit Florida, or, you know, it's very clickbaity, and it tends to be a lot more opportunities for surface level storytelling.
Thank you.
My
That was
32
solid. Loved it. Who's
minutes.
next? Harry.
Sure. I think like my what's right with travel kind of goes in line with what's wrong with travel. I think as far as it being one of probably the best ways to get capital from kind of like richer countries or like the global north, or whatever term you want to use, out to more developing nations or places that have more risk of like high level poverty. One of the best ways to like have that capital exchange hands, like have that money go from down to the Caribbean, for example, in the form of industry jobs. That also goes in hand with what I think is wrong with travel. Is travel's a bit like in at its essence, there has to be a little bit what's the word? You're kind of like you want to treat yourself. You want to go out there and kind of like be a little bit voyeuristic or be a little do a little bit of like what you wouldn't do back home. Like maybe back home you always turn off the air conditioning when you leave your house. When you go to a hotel room, you rarely do. So it's a little bit hedonistic is the word I'm looking for. You kind of do things you wouldn't normally do. So I think like really changing our mindsets around that as being not just travelers but visitors in somebody else's home and how we treat those homes is really important. And then with the movement of capital, there is still a lot of the tourism product that isn't being that where the money isn't staying in the hands of the places that you're visiting through like leakage. So really reducing that leakage. While it is one of the best ways to move money from the global north to the global south, a lot of it's still not getting to the places where it needs to get, in my opinion. So I would say like that's kind of what's good. And I think the other thing I would say is that when people talk about sustainable travel, they talk about it like it's a segment, like it's like adult travel or student travel or luxury travel. It's like no. Like when you talk about sustainability, is all of that, all those travel segments done in a sustainable manner. It's not like you can like it's not like ecotourism. That's a type of sustainable travel when done right. But any kind of travel you can apply sustainability practices to.
Thanks, Harry. Vinci, what's right with travel? What's wrong with travel?
Thank you. I would love to respond to Harry first. Yeah, totally agree with you that if, in an ideal world, if we can channel, capital from the global north to the global south to kind of like make global inequities a little more, equitable, that would be really awesome. Like the reality, as you pointed out, is that, economic or tourism leakage is still like a real problem and in most places where tourism operates. And so like how can we help people, not just the tourism professionals or the tourism industry, but like, travelers shift mindset? Because a lot of travelers may think that, well, I'm traveling to this destination and bring money in. So I'm spending money there. So, I play my role. And so I'm entitled to do, what I usually am not able to do at home, as you said. But people need to be more educated about like where the money goes, right? And even if we talk about like refraining or moving away from supporting foreign owned companies, there are still like local big companies who are like exploiting or not paying their workers right. And so we need to make sure that all the farmers, the drivers, the tour guides, and they all like getting their fair share and pay fairly. And what was the question again, Ronnie? What is right about
Actually, I
what is
think we're
right with
good. This is transitioning to
okay,
the next question in terms
okay,
of keep
sure.
going with what you're saying under the
Mm-hmm.
scope of why does travel need to be decolonialized? What does that
Yeah.
mean? Like what does the term decolonialized mean? I think
Mm-hmm.
what you were saying fits very well with where we were going.
So, so a lot of people may not be able to see the link between tourism and colonialism. However, global mass tourism or the extractive model of tourism is deeply rooted in colonialism and fueled by neocolonialism, right? And so we need to decolonizing travel means like recognizing the power imbalances that exist in this world, shaped by settler colonialism and neocolonialism, and that colonialism is not a thing of the past. It is still like present, and coloniality, that is the legacy of historical colonialism, is still affecting a lot of minoritized communities and indigenous communities around the world. And so we are part of the system. You know, we're implicit and we're complicit in some ways, whether we want it or not. And so just like really starting with recognizing that global tourism thrives because of or thanks to this inequality. And so to decolonize travel, to me, it means different things to different people. So to the tourism industry, it means asking whose land we're taking away from in order to build that resort, right? It means what colonial narrative we're trying to push in our marketing materials and in our museums and in our parks, right? And we also need to think about like who are benefiting from the so-called economic benefits that we're bringing into the destinations that we're operating. You know, again, as I said earlier, are we paying everyone involved fairly, and also are we yielding fees in the leadership to the people who actually belong to the land, like indigenous and like minoritized communities? Do they have a say in how they want tourism to be shaped in that place? And yeah, making sure that tourism operations does not take away local resources, you know, because like we talk about food insecurity in many places, we talk about waters and lands as resources, you know, from the capitalist point of view, but lands and waters are sacred for indigenous peoples around the world. And then for travelers, to decolonize travel is like really to shift our mindset, like, you know, to understand that it's not just about us. It's not about us as travelers. You know, we need to decenter ourselves from this whole idea of travel, like what experience we're gonna get, you know, and how can I benefit? Like what kind of personal growth and transformation am I going to benefit from? That's very good, but then we also need to remember that there are other people that we are going to affect because of our presence. So when we go, as Harry said earlier, when we go traveling, you know, we're not going to our playgrounds, we're going to other people's homes. So there is a need to shift the mindset of what travel is or should be, and it's not just about us. I mean, I can go on and on, but like I wanna give space for others to share their views as well.
Jazz or Harry, anything you want to add to this question about what decolonialization means and why it needs to happen, Jazz?
Yeah, like plus ones and 100 emojis for everything that Vinci shared. And I was just thinking about, again, I'm often thinking from a media perspective. And there's been conversations with some amazing writers and folks that I've known about, like, is it even possible to decolonize travel? Because the creation of a tourism industry was based on colonialism, as you were talking about, Vinci. And you know, I still think that it is possible. To your point with those personal decisions of how we're like checking ourselves and like decentering ourselves, right? And so one of the things I talk about a lot is, you know, if you're a traveler from the United States, you know, not bringing your American, you know, US energy to certain places, meaning a level of entitlement and an expectation that, like, you know, people are going to wait on you. Everything's going to just move, you know, infrastructurally the way that you want, as fast as it is. And, you know, sorry. But yeah, I think that it really requires like some self assessment in thinking of that. And also, you know, to your point about the marketing, so much of the marketing in the last, let's say, 100 years of places has been from a colonial lens. Like when we look at the marketing around Hawaii and Cuba, it's like these very whitewashed imagery, and it's also very sexualized. It's like women in bikinis or like hula dancers and, you know, these kinds of things. And so it just Vinci, you brought up this point. It asked me the question of like, how are we replicating those tropes or stereotypes or imagery or ideas through our own social media, the way that we share things, our own storytelling. And I look at that a lot because content creation is such a big part of the tourism industry now. And really, like, I would hope and ask folks to really consider and think about how they're presenting, a people, a culture, a land, and what does that, for someone who's never been there, are you reinforcing certain stereotypes or certain narratives that are colonial? Again, really thinking about not looking at things from an extractive point. Like a lot of times folks of color, I'll speak for Black folks in particular, we're trying to get out the States and live free for a second, if not move somewhere to live, feel freer, feel safer, but to really be mindful that we're not replicating that same kind of colonial energy, because we have passport privilege and because we have dollar privilege, to just be mindful of what our impacts are, and looking at it as an opportunity for connection with other folks and learning from other folks while still feeling free and safe and having a great, amazing time. So I'll pass it to Harry.
And in the case of Harry, not only do you talk about this, it's literally front and center as to what the purpose of offbeat travel is.
Yeah, and that kind of evolved after working in the travel industry for 15 years at like US companies and realizing how disposable the locals would become. And then it was exasperated for me during COVID when all of a sudden we couldn't travel to these places. And the first people that were let go were like the local guides, the local managers, the people in country. Because like, oh, we don't need you. We still need marketers. We still need to talk about travel. We still need to create content, but we don't need the locals. And then exasperated by the fact that during COVID, so many companies didn't abide by local laws in severances, in the kind of the things that we do things as individuals, but also as corporations that we wouldn't do at home when we travel to other countries. So I think Vinci and Jana touched on this and like how you can be a good traveler, but then also like how do you be a good business when you're working abroad, and assuring that you're like, it's common sense. It's like, oh, of course we're gonna have social security and healthcare and everything for our employees who are doing marketing. But then when you talk about your guides, like, oh, you don't provide any of those things. So that's kind of where why we put it front and center. It was from experience and seeing how, I was always part of the local operations, but those operations were never given all the resources, or often were the ones that were always on the cost pressure. When you talk about decolonization, first, we just need to recognize that there still exist colonies. Like we still have a place like Puerto Rico or Hawaii or Guam or Tahiti, like places that are also like, you know, colonies and tourist destinations of people where you see, when you're a US traveler going to Puerto Rico, like we're really conscious of this. Like it's we kind of feel like we own it literally, and it's like the biggest demonstration of that kind of colonialism that still exists. Um, but like for us, like the biggest part of decolonizing is not like necessarily going around taking down statues of Christopher Columbus. It's it's recognizing that when colonialism first started, you had an extraction of resources like sugarcane. Haiti was the most richest colony in the Americas, and provided sugarcane for most of the world, and that was all extracted out. Like Haiti doesn't see the benefits of all that money, all that wealth it created generations ago. And that same wealth that we're creating now with countries like the DR, that 20% of the GDP comes from tourism. How do we ensure that the history doesn't repeat itself, and that we keep as much of that economic power of tourism in the communities? That's kind of what we focus our when we talk about decolonizing. Then there's also like the aspect of like I think Jana and then she just kind of alluded to, is like the decolonizing of narratives too. A lot of the times people are like, oh, I know Costa Rica. Like I know exactly what it's like, but they don't like actually know the place. They haven't actually gone there. They haven't experienced it. And also like the experience of a Dominican who was born in Santo Domingo is very different from the experience of a Dominican who's born in the mountains or a Haitian Dominican. There's so many different narratives between places. So, what is the narrative that we're seeing through like marketing? Probably the narrative of like some kind of dominant culture, like, oh, what are the subcultures and how are those cultures treated within the spaces that we're visiting? Um, and then the last one is how are locals portrayed, which we talked about, and also like language expectation. I feel like a small one, but like especially in the U.S. context, there's a lot of like you need to speak my language. Like I experienced it firsthand. Like I was born in New York, but when I was 6 months old, my family moved back to the Dominican Republic. My first language is Spanish. When I moved back to New York, I had to learn English. Like you couldn't survive. You can't advance. But when we travel, we expect everyone to speak our language, like especially as English speaking people. So like it's really being conscious of that when you're traveling, and just like little things. But like the main part for me is that like kind of dismantling those systems that keep taking kind of that extractive system that's taking more than it's leaving in the communities that we're traveling to.
Thank you. So one of the things that's come up in this session and when we were prepping for it was this idea of identity. So starting with Jazz, how do you find your identities impacting you while you're traveling? And then also, given the chat you and I had about empowerment, and how we were looking at that potentially through different lenses, would love for you to touch on, this idea of empowerment and how you see or don't see it and how that fits with the identity point.
Yeah, it's such a, I love this conversation. But I will speak again, I speak from myself and my experience. I am, from the United States, been born and raised here. I'm a Black queer woman. And so traveling has always been, for me, I'm seeking out, I feel comfortable when I'm around for particularly Black folks of color, traveling to the throughout the African diaspora is like what feels good in my spirit. But also that can be complicated. And I think it's kind of what, Harry was alluding to in this, and talking about is that, being from the US is an entirely different context than being Black in other places. And so it's such a point of connection, and it's like a beautiful experience to like meet and connect with folks throughout the diaspora. But sometimes, there can be an expectation of like, we're all the same, we're family, and we are family. But, when you have, again, US dollars, right? Like that means something. You're going to get treated differently, and have access to different things when you travel than perhaps locals. So, for example, I lived in Puerto Viejo in Costa Rica, and that's where it's Afro-Costa Rican folks and indigenous communities as well. And, I know a lot of folks who lived there who are, I'll say immigrants, people say expats, whatever you want to use, the language you want to use. But, there were challenges for some folks who were, from the States who moved there and wanting to connect with the local Afro-Costa Rican women there. And these women are like, yeah, like, don't just expect that we're going to be buddy. We come from totally different backgrounds. Like there has to be some level of building and trust, and understanding, because of different realities in terms of accessibility and financial, access to things. And so it's been interesting to see there's been a lot more community building, but we can't just assume that because, I'm Black, you're Black, and Blackness means totally different things and has different contexts in different places. And then when you talk about being queer, there's people who like trans, travelers, there's a very minimal, there doesn't seem to be a lot of like mainstream conversation about trans travelers, right? And so for like example, I went to Egypt, and in the airport, they're separating you through security, men and women. And so there was, I guess I would say, maybe a non-binary person, who, had more masculine presenting features, but was identifying as a woman. And the security guards were looking super confused. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm like, I don't know Arabic. I want to step in and like support and like help this person. I'm like, yes, this is like a woman, but so the thing is like, there's all these different ways that gender intersects or, being queer. And even too with gender, how Black women and women of color are sexualized in other countries, as opposed to, experiences of white women. And so I say all this to say that like, what I wish that there was more acknowledgement of in a broader sense. And also I don't have an expectation of it, but that like our identities intersect, and that a lot of the, white men who are in positions of power, or, white people who tend to be in leadership positions, are like, oh, it's safe. It's no problem. You could travel there. And I'm like, really? Say more about that. And there seems to be blind spots about how your identities intersect. And also at the same time, being Black or a woman of color gives you access to like different things when you travel. Like people might be more welcome to like, come to my family reunion, come to this, let me show you that. And so that's like a super cool blessing. But yes, it is. All that to say is it's complicated and complex. And I think as travelers, we learn a lot about ourselves and what our expectations are, as Harry was talking about, when we travel and we are received in certain ways or not received in certain ways.
So staying with you for a sec, coming back to the empowerment question, how would
Oh,
you, yeah, how do you look at empowerment when it comes to travel?
I mean, the way, and this is how we were talking about it, I feel kind of like what Vinci was talking about is like, yes, it's important for us to feel maybe empowered in terms of like safety, but I think the empowerment feels like it's centering us. And so how are we thinking about, I don't feel like empowerment's the right word that resonates for me with travel. It's more of like, how are we like community building, or like, are we empowering each other? Because if we're saying like, we're going somewhere and empowering people, that feels very like savior kind of energy, or like colonial energy. And then if there's like a level of personal empowerment, I think that that's great, right? And you should feel like, hey, I climbed this mountain, or like I went surfing for the first time or something like that, but we aren't the ones to empower others. We can support and be in community with others.
Vinci,
That feels better.
thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Janice. Actually, in our newly published Decolonizing ebook, there was one page about this, about the use of language and how like some language or some terms carry colonial undertones. And we have been long questioning the word empowerment, because I don't personally feel very comfortable using it, because when we say we go to a place and empower a community, what does that even imply? It does sound colonial to me. It's like we are talking about a power hierarchy and now we come to save you. And that's not the right way of looking at things, right? And I would say that people are disempowered because we took away their power in the first place. And so now, tourism industry, like leadership, we need to return the power to the local people. And also like, I totally agree with you that I would prefer to use the word support. Like, we're playing a supporting role, when, and when communities actually have the agency to decide and to shape their own life, their own economy, and so on. And so back to your question about privilege. Did
It
you
was
say that
about
we should
identity.
also
If you want to make it about privilege, that's your call.
privilege and identity?
Yeah,
Well,
that's fine.
yeah, privilege comes with identity and also the lack of, right? And so I will start by talking a little bit about myself. I'm obviously non-American, non-native, and well, a lot of white people are not Native Americans anyways, neither. So I am not from here. I'm originally from Hong Kong. I am ethnically Chinese, but I do not identify as Chinese. Because politics, geopolitics over there is very complicated and complex, and that also affects how I see the world and how I navigate. How I experience the world when I navigate through it. And so yeah, I wanted to really echo what Jess just said um about the fact that you may experience certain things because of your intersectional identity in one place. That intersectional identity may play out very differently when you are in a different country, right? So me being an Asian immigrant here in the United States grants me experience that is very different when I traveled to France, when I traveled to Africa, when I was in Senegal. People called me the white woman, and I never in my life, had I heard that, like, or being identified as such. And so like your identities kind of like, are fluid, like move through as you move through the world, and therefore affects or like that affects the kind of treatments or experience that you receive, right? And also the kind of relationship that you have or you build with the locals. And yeah, talking about identity, I am actually a disabled person. I have a hearing disability, and when I I remember like 20 years ago when I was traveling in Europe, I missed multiple trains because I didn't hear the announcement, because there was no signs or anything. Nowadays, it's very different, right? Like we think about accessibility and things like that. But like in the past, like it really gave me, you know, barriers and challenges that non-disabled people would not have experienced. And then like we talked about passport privilege for sure. People who were born in, I don't know, people who were born in Malaysia would have like, a relatively higher freedom of mobility than like people having a Yemeni passport, right? And now we can also think about why we keep saying that travel is a privilege, because it's not just about the passport. Even if we like, travel within our own country in the United States, if we can hop on a car and like, do a road trip for 2 to 3 weeks, not everybody can do that. Like there are people who live from paycheck to paycheck and who cannot afford to miss one day of work, right? And so there's so many nuances, like so many different like intersections and different identities, that how they intersect, and that would totally change our relationship to the world and how we travel and whether or not we can travel. So it is a huge topic that people need to realize. When people say on social media, there's a lot, we see a lot like, you have to go travel, the long holiday weekend is coming up. Like, where are you going? Like, there's this assumption and expectations of of people like needing to travel. Whereas now I think decolonizing travel really means to take a step back and ask ourselves our motivation, like, why do we want to travel? Why do we want to go to this place that I want to go to? Talking about like how intrinsically colonial these bucket lists are, in the mainstream media. Like, oh, 2025, these are the 10 places that you need to go to, or like Mount Everest that you need to conquer. So yeah, we need to stop doing that and really think about why we want to travel. And if we do decide to travel, what are we giving to the community, rather than just taking from the experience?
Vincey, I don't know if you saw Karen Hotty's question, but it specifically was, how does traveling and tourism work for deaf and hard of hearing people? Will they be welcome in a different country? So as somebody who identifies as having a disability specifically related to hearing, is there more that you could share on those experiences?
Yeah, I would say yes, I do have a hearing disability, but I'm also not completely deaf. Knowing that all disabilities are actually like a continuum or a spectrum. You know, you can be 60% blind and like 50% deaf, like me. How does traveling and tourism works for deaf and hard of hearing people? Will they be welcome in in a different country? Oftentimes, I would have to say, unfortunately, because deafness is an invisible disability, oftentimes people don't even notice that we have the needs that we that or the accessibility needs that we have. Um, in the travel and tourism industry, I have been going to a lot of conferences, especially during COVID time. You know, we had to keep our mask on, and it was very challenging for me. And then there were networking sessions, and it was almost impossible. Like, you know, as an extrovert, for once, I just like really need to recess into my room because that was not for me. And I remember I went to Travel Unity 2021 in Lake Placid, and Ronnie and team really set an excellent example of what accessibility means. When I told him about my difficulty and my challenges, and I said, like, you know, if speakers go on stage and talk with a mask on, I would not be able to hear one thing or understand anything. And given social distancing, the stage is like quite far away from the audience, so he agreed to ask, you know, all the speakers to take their mask off when they present, and that was really, really helpful. So I still remember that, and thank you so much, Ronnie. And so yeah, sometimes I feel that we almost have a responsibility to make our disability visible, otherwise people wouldn't even know, right? So we have to, unfortunately, it's like the responsibility is on us to kind of ask for accommodation. And yeah, so it's difficult. But nowadays, I would say most places you go to, you know, let's say to the airport, and at mostly all international airports, there would be announcements, and there would be, like, you know, you would see signs, you would see flight updates. So it's oftentimes not just through a single channel. So I haven't experienced a lot of like challenges moving around the world. Maybe for entirely deaf people, that would be a different story, because I don't know what they experience, because I don't, you know, I don't have that lens. But I so far feel that most countries have been welcoming to people who have deaf and hearing disabilities.
Thanks, Vinci. And I guess I'll just, for the question, draw two different things. I think there's a difference between being welcoming as a general idea of, oh, do we want you here? And I think for the most part, that's not the problem. It's more, are there structures in place to give you the accommodations you need to be able to maneuver and feel like you can be in that space in a way where you're getting the information and giving the information and having that loop in a way that works. Harry, identity, privilege, all you.
Yeah, I think it's great how, you know, it's very inextricably connected to privileges, your identity. But for me, having kind of grown up between two places, it was always something that I struggled with. You know, when we moved back to the Dominican Republic and I was growing up here, everyone called me Gringo. And then when I moved back to the Bronx, everyone was calling me Dominican. I'm like, okay, what am I here? It really depends on where I am. Um, but then also being part of the diaspora really made me realize that privilege piece a lot, because a lot of the time in the context of the Dominican Republic, there's a million Dominicans in New York, literally a million Dominicans in New York. You know, there's more Dominicans outside of it. You know, there's so many Dominicans in the diaspora that they actually have representation in the Dominican Congress. They have their own congressperson for. So that just comes with a ton of privilege. So when I started working down here in tourism, I intentionally made myself I saw myself as an outsider. I quickly realized that I couldn't claim being Dominican because I don't live the Dominican experience that Dominicans live here. And the moment I started looking at it that way, it kind of brought a different perspective for me. But I live it every day. You know, I make dollars. My wife works from home in tech, and so we live here in the Dominican Republic. We don't live if we were doing those same jobs here, living in the Dominican economy, we wouldn't be making the money we're making. We wouldn't be living where we're living. So kind of really being conscious of that when you're traveling is so important, and also just being mindful of it. It's not about like tipping extra, like that's so it can be so patronizing. Um, it's really about like how do you carry yourself and how do you um interact with the local communities and how do you um yeah, and then for going back to like the idea of the diaspora, being really careful, whether it be Dominican or Puerto Rican or Black folks going back to Africa, whatever or Asians going back to Asia. There's so much. The U.S. is made up of immigrants. Like one being conscious that you may be visiting a country that your country once colonized, and two, being conscious of the fact that even though you are part of the diaspora, you don't understand what's going on in those countries yet. And it takes time to build that. It takes time to learn about the local politics. So before starting to like, I think instantly want to give opinions or give thoughts or like compare. Just listen, just learn. Like spend a long time just learning about those places from there in order to really gain the insight that you need in order to be able to impact those places. And that's where the empowerment comes in, which I agree can be kind of patronizing. But once you ingrain yourself in those communities, once you actually become part of the community and you're there and you start a business, you start a project, whatever you're doing, then it's not about empowering others, it's about empowering yourself and that community that you're now a part of to move forward. And that's kind of how the viewpoint that I take at Offbeat is, we pride ourselves in hiring locals for a long time. Um, I got given all types of excuses as to why you can have like a marketing person be local or another one like, oh, they don't understand safety. I'm like, yeah, you can train people on safety, you can train people on marketing. And odds are in a city of 4.5 million people like Flamingo, there's probably really intelligent people that can do all those things. Um, so really like, you know, you're kind of building that community, I think, rather than coming in and saying like you need this, but like taking the time to build that community for yourself in your homeland as a person of diaspora is really important.
Yes, you wanted to.
Yes, I just wanted to add one thing that I would be that I think is really important for me to add about identity and privilege is also thinking about colorism. And, when I travel with, some of my darker skinned sisters, the difference in terms of how people will receive us. And depending on the place, that may be good or bad, to put it in blanket terms, but, how the lightness of your skin is looked at in a variety of contexts in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Asia, um, how people will assume where you're from. So like a lot of times I don't get clocked as someone from the US. People will swear up and down all day long. It don't matter where I am on the planet. They swear I'm Puerto Rican, which makes me laugh. And I'm like, that's the New Yorker in me. I grew up around Puerto Ricans and my skin tone is fair. You know what I mean? Like I get it. But it just is interesting to watch, because I travel with a lot of women of color across, in different shades of women of color, and that there are different ways that we may be treated, whether it's like sexualized or just assumptions. Like, I have South Asian sisters who are, people, will treat them a certain way versus, Black or Latina women. So I just really wanted to bring up the impact of colorism and how colorism is a universal construct of how people will make assumptions of how to treat people.
All right, I'm going to wrap us with the last question we had prepped plus question from the audience. So starting with the easy question we had prepped, which was, can we be truly equitable in a capitalist world? And then Nyasha. All right, Nyasha writes, The speaker spoke about the colonial roots of extraction in the tourism industry. What are examples of investment, empowerment, support with local communities that they have done or seen from other companies that should be celebrated? Which in my mind suggests that the answer is yes, there are ways to do this equitably in a capitalist world. So why don't we start with Harry?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I think it's easy to focus on the negative, but there's a ton of positive. And from excuse me, from the perspective you asked, from like, the perspective of the work that we're doing, um, I'll give you a couple examples. The one, um, Costa Rica comes to mind with Tortuguero National Park along the Caribbean coast, which was created in like the 1970s. Before the park, there was a huge problem with the kind of hunting of sea turtles because you could sell them for about $300 in the black market. Fast forward 30, 40 years, creation of the park. There's been a whole infrastructure set up around volunteers, people coming down to like help the turtles. And anyway, and now the value of the same sea turtle is about $1,100 alive because there's so much of like a tourism infrastructure around saving the sea turtle. So that's just one example of like how you can use tourism as a way to positively impact communities. We do a lot of volunteer tourism, which can get a bad name because when done incorrectly, it can be very harmful. I have seen instances of people like painting the same house year after year just to make the people feel like they're doing something. But when done correctly, when you're channeling like what we do is that a certain amount of the money that a group will pay go towards a service project or community impact project. And in the Dominican Republic and Batay communities, which are communities of mostly sugarcane, mostly Haitian communities in the Dominican Republic that have some of the lowest standards of living in the country. We have a whole program for students around immigration and statelessness, where we talk about the issues going on between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. We start that dialogue, which is really important. And then we also take the students into the communities, and with the money that they contributed and with their labor, we've built like 15, almost 20 homes in the Bataves since like 2013. So there's like really powerful way that you could use tourism as a way to positively impact communities for sure. And there's like a lot of examples of it around the world. So I'm an optimist about the capitalist system. But you really need to do the work. You can't expect it to just happen. There's also a lot of greed that comes with capitalism. So like, and that's just inevitable human nature. So like with you are on the side of like wanting to do the good, like don't just talk about it. Don't just like post on Instagram. Like actually go out there and do the hard work because a lot of the time I see a lot of people who like critique things. They like, they're like, oh, like, you're talking about decolonizing, but we still use, this resort, which is foreign owned. Like, yeah, it's a process. I didn't say I'm there. I say I'm working towards that. And it's really hard to like build up a house of cards when you like put it, you're doing that whole building up, but it's super easy to knock it down. Be the person building it up. Don't be the person knocking it down all the time. Sometimes the structure doesn't need to be constructive, but like obviously let's work together to make it a better industry.
Thank you, Harry. So I'd say that a lot of that is through probably, the creating the tourism product company lens and how that relationship kind of works. So Jazz, with your answer, if you want to maybe add some bits on how you think the travel media space might be feeding in or not, and how this can go well in that as well.
Yeah, I think there's some really great examples. I'm going to start from like the business perspective or as a traveler. As Harry said, like it takes work, so meaning doing some research, right? And there's a lot of great ways to find things. Like, one of the blessings of social media is that it's easier to find community-based tourism experiences or tour operators who are focused on that. I'm going to give a little plug for this panel that's coming up next because there's some folks who are doing good work around this. I'm working with Tammy Fairweather. We talk about this a lot because we live in New Orleans. And so really doing consulting work to help travelers and help folks who are building tours when they come to New Orleans. How are you investing in the local communities, the local artists and culture bearers? How are you supporting cultural preservation with your tourism dollars? So, there's things where you can find folks, in different locations who are doing that work. I also want to shout out Martinique Lewis. you know, the ABC travel book, sorry if I'm messing up the name, Marty, I'm sorry. But the ABC Green Book is an app where you can find Black-owned businesses wherever you go. And so, you know, there's ways to really do this to prevent the leakage that Vinci and Harry were talking about of, if I'm going to go, you know, spend my money, I can support businesses who are making sure that locals are benefiting from tourism dollars. And what I'll say, I think from the media industry, you know, I would say supporting, you know, at this point, bloggers, because as a travel journalist, it's really hard sometimes to deal with mainstream media to tell the stories that we want to tell. You know, I've been wanting to tell stories about, there's a company in Argentina that in Buenos Aires that focuses on Black and queer history in Buenos Aires, right? And like, you know, folks are like, yeah, that's cool, but like, why now? What's the hook? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't need no damn hook. Like, that's interesting to me and the travelers that I know, you know? So I say that to say of, you know, supporting, you know, independent media folks, you know, following their blogs, following their content on social, you know, and also being mindful of, again, your own platforms. And as a traveler, what's the types of storytelling that you're doing and lifting up? Yes, Lunfarda. Thank you, Marty. And so that's my plug for the panel coming up next. So you can hear Tammy and Marty. And I will pass the mic to Vinci.
Last words, Vinci.
All right.
Change the world.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you, Harriet and Jazz, for all these wonderful examples. There are a lot of community and indigenous-led tourism projects around the world, and the media needs to really elevate their their projects, because, like, you know, if we don't see, like, if travelers don't know where to find them, it's going to be hard to support. So, and then I would also say that the government and also the tourism industry, like everyone, all the stakeholders have like the responsibility to decolonize and to, like, you know, uplift local communities and like also elevate their narrative. So one example that really struck me was that the National Museum of Brazil in Rio, and after it got burnt down, the curator has decided that they would take the opportunity to create indigenous, like, you know, indigenous exhibits. And so that, like, you know, from now on, we have a platform to kind of celebrate indigenous wisdoms. As you all know, like in museums, especially national museums around the world, they have a lot of exhibits that are stolen, you know, from other countries in other parts of the world, and that's super colonial. And so for museums to take the first step to decolonize their collection is super important, because the visitors will then get the message of why it was done the wrong way and what can be done now. And also, Jazz talked a lot about travel writing, media, and I would love to plug, you know, one of my favorite guidebook series, which is not the ordinary guidebook, called Detours, a decolonial guide to Hawaii. And it is the first issue of a series, you know, that is in the making. The next one will be on Palestine, and then Singapore, Korea, and so on. And so, like, it's a collection of stories told by the natives. And so, like, this is the kind of resources travelers need to seek out, instead of just, like, you know, looking at the very general guidebooks that are written by a white person who stayed in the country for 2 weeks and write about the entire country. You know, that's how the mainstream, like, guidebooks, unfortunately, have been conceived, like, over the past decades. And so if there needs to be a change, and then, like, we the consumers or travelers need to seek out, like, different narratives and make sure that we're not only taking in one side of a story.
Thank you,
So
everybody.
how would we get the fan to turn on and off?
Oh, well, that's a good question. How are
Okay, so it's
we gonna wrap this
automatic.
up? I think that it would be great if people did their reaction buttons and such. So little fireworks and things. I think this panel deserves hearts and fireworks. Here, which one am I
Thank
going to do? There we go. There's a ta-da. All right, thank you. That was so good. Again, thank you to Harry and Offbeat for supporting the session and the virtual summit overall. Thank you, Jazz and Vinci. And thank you to all of our sponsors for the virtual summit: Pick LJ, Miles Partnership, Visit Greater Palm Springs, Explore Brookhaven, Visit Lauderdale, and Offbeat Travel. Again, we have our inaugural awards dinner in New York, December 10th. CDTP, our highest level individual DEI certificate, is in November. And we have 2 different ways to do that now. You can attend the workshops and do your comprehensive DEI plan, which is part of that course right away, or you can wait and do that plan later. And then, of course, we welcome your donations as a 501c3. Okay, we are wrapping this session.